Since the Republican Party transformed itself into what some would call the Trump Party, it has become increasingly rare to see Republicans who speak out against the former president and, of course, the Republican nominee. There have been a few over the years. I mean, we've seen retired Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a Republican, outspoken about the former president's dangers to democracy. He even sat, if you recall, on the January 6th committee. Former GOP Congresswoman Liz Cheney, another critic who also served on that same committee. There's also Jeff Duncan, the former Republican lieutenant governor of Georgia, who speaks out quite frequently about the former president. And one thing in common with those three, well, none are currently in office. So what's exceptionally rare are sitting Republicans who do speak out. And even more rare, sitting Republicans who speak out and then go on to endorse a Democrat. But tonight, we have that for you here. The Republican mayor of Mesa, Arizona, John Giles, with a piece out today endorsing Kamala Harris. And he's here with me now. Mayor Giles, welcome. You know, you're really perhaps putting yourself out there with this endorsement. I do wonder, what has compelled you to do so?
You know, it was with a lot of thought. You know, I'm certainly not anxious. I am a Republican, and I enjoy endorsing Republicans. So this was a very considered step to take. And I also, as a mayor, you know, I love to not get involved in partisan politics at all when I can avoid it. Mayors like to focus on solving problems and on city issues and on, you know, being in the middle of between the 20-yard lines on all the things that there are consensus on. So this was not something that I was excited to do or necessarily looking to do. But, you know, occasionally there are issues and questions that we're presented with in life that are just too compelling to be silent. And I knew that if that I you know, had to sleep at night and that I couldn't do that well if I didn't speak out and express my disappointment in the Republican nominee.
Have there been some who have expressed disappointment in your decision to come forward and endorse Kamala Harris?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's to be expected. But what I didn't necessarily expect was the tremendous response that I got today from people in my party and in my community expressing support for the op-ed that I published.
Let's talk about the why. Why you are supporting Kamala Harris and rejecting Donald Trump, who is a Republican. What is the reason that you find her to be the preference and the preferred candidate over even Trump?
Well, I think that there's a minimum bar for elected officials in this country, and you know, having to do with character, having to do with commitment to the rule of law and the Constitution. And I don't feel like Mr. Trump gets over that low bar. And at the same time, I do think that the vice president is a good alternative. The contrast between the two of them is stark, and President Trump does not compare well. There are many issues that, again, being a Republican, I differ with the vice president on. But what, to me, is the compelling reason to support her is that I don't question that at the top of her agenda is what is in the best interest of the United States. I honestly can't say that I think that's the case with Mr. Trump.
Your words speak volumes, and I know you've written and talked about election denialism as perhaps one reason to reject him. And, you know, Trump made comments over the weekend saying Christians won't have to vote again if he gets back in the White House. Here he is, by the way, tonight trying to clean up those remarks. Mayor, listen.
And I think everybody understood it. I didn't know there was any.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it's the constant refrain. I mean, after they have done all the things that we've talked about tonight.
Horrible.
All of the things.
Russia, all the things.
And dump their guy of 52 years, just dump him to the side. So they do all that, and then they say, well, no, you can't vote for him because he's literally never going to leave office. They're actually still saying that.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable.
But you will leave office after 4 years.
By the way, and I did last time.
Do you think that he would leave office at the end of his term if he is elected, given your concerns about election denialism and his comments about voting today?
No, I don't. You know, as I was writing this op-ed that ran in the Arizona Republic this morning, I remember at one point I had a phrase in the op-ed where I said, if Donald Trump's elected, I fear this might be the last free and fair election of my lifetime. And I struck it out because I thought, you know what, that's a little hyperbolic. That's more than needs to be said. And then, you know, he makes this statement saying that once I'm elected and I'm enthroned, you know, we won't need elections any longer. So sometimes Donald Trump says the quiet part out loud, and we have to believe him. And I think this is one of those occasions that we got some real insight into what his priorities are.
There are many who will say that the conversation itself is hyperbolic, and then you hear statements that he's made, and you have to wonder which came first, the chicken or the egg in these conversations. You know, one of Harris's potential contenders for her running mate happens to come from your state, Mark Kelly, the senator. Would you want to see him in that VP spot?
Absolutely. I've had the privilege of working with Senator Kelly. He's the real, you know, John Glenn, right stuff person. And he would make an excellent vice president. So I haven't spoken to him about this, but I do know him well. He's very talented. He does a deep dive into everything. This would not be the type of vice president you just send to funerals. You know, he's a very capable person. I could see him being the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President at the same time, because he's very, very capable.
Well, that would be two daunting tasks at once. Let's see, maybe he can do either or if, in fact, she chooses him in the end. Mayor Giles, nice to speak with you. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.